Welcome to the deep dive. We don't just skim the surface, we take the sources you send us and really get into the key insights.
Exactly. No endless scrolling here.
Today, we're diving into sport and recreation in the lives of young New Zealanders. This is all based on the 2011 Young People Survey.
Yeah, and this was no small thing. We're talking a really comprehensive survey.
How many students?
Over 17,000 aged 5 right up to 18.
Yeah.
And they covered more than 500 schools, so it gives us a really broad picture. Yeah,
Absolutely. And the scope, too. It wasn't just, who's on the rugby team.
not at all. They looked at everything. Casual stuff, what they called mucking around,
Right.
all the way to proper competitions,
Yeah.
school, clubs, how much time they spent, what they were actually interested in,
Even volunteering and just watching.
even volunteering and spectating. Exactly. The whole picture.
Okay. So our mission today is to kind of pull all that together, give everyone listening a clear sense of how young Kiwis were involved back then.
That's the plan. Find the big trends, maybe some surprising facts, and just, tell the story that the data holds.
Great. Let's start right at the beginning then. The big question. Did young New Zealanders back in 2011 actually like playing sport?
Well, for most of them, a big yes. The headline was something like 7 out of 10 boys said they liked playing sport a lot.
7 out of 10, okay. And girls.
Little lower, but still high. Around 6 out of 10 girls liked it a lot. So, generally very positive feelings.
That slight difference is interesting, though. But what about the other end? Were there many who actively disliked it?
Hardly any, actually. Really small numbers. About 3.5% of boys and maybe 5% of girls said they didn't like playing sport.
So very few actively disliked it. That's a strong positive base.
Definitely. A strong base of just enjoying being active.
Okay, so they generally liked it. What about actually doing it? What did overall participation look like?
This is where it gets pretty amazing. Almost everyone, like 99% of both boys and girls, across all the ages.
99%.
Yeah, 99% had done at least one sport or recreation activity this year, meaning the year of the survey.
Wow. That's almost universal. It suggests it was just part of life, really.
Completely. Really baked into the culture for young people in New Zealand at that time, it seems. Quite notable.
Okay, but 99% doing something. I bet the something varied a lot. What were the big activities, the standouts?
Yeah, huge variety. But swimming.
Mm-hmm.
Swimming was consistently right up there. Boys, girls, all the age groups. 5, 10, 11, 14, 15, 18.
Swimming's a classic. What else for boys?
For boys, things like athletics, cycling, football, those were pretty consistently popular too.
And girls, besides swimming.
Athletics and cycling were also strong for girls. And then as they got older, netball and dance really started to feature more prominently.
Right, some definite mainstays there. Did they see any differences, like based on ethnicity? Did preferred activities change?
They did, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of overlap. Obviously, those top sports were popular across the board. But the survey did pull out some differences. Certain activities might pop up in the top 10 for, say, Maori or Pacific or Asian young people that weren't quite as high nationally.
So cultural background played a role in preferences.
It seems so. It suggests that while lots of activities have broad appeal, there are definitely cultural nuances influencing what kids choose.
That makes sense. What about those informal games they mentioned, mucking around, stuff like tag or foursquare?
Oh yeah, that was huge too. Really widespread. About 8 out of 10 kids, boys and girls, played games like that.
8 out of 10, so nearly as common as the more formal stuff.
Pretty much. Though, as you'd probably guess, it was more common for the younger kids, less so for teenagers.
Right, priorities change.
Exactly. And there were some slight ethnic variations there too. Pacific and Asian boys and Asian girls were a little less likely to participate in those specific games compared to the average.
Interesting. Okay, so participation is massive. Across formal sport and informal play, what about frequency? How often were they doing these things?
So they looked at regular participation, which they defined as doing something at least once a week.
Okay, once a week or more.
Yep. For the younger boys, 5 to 10 years old, the things done most often were cycling, athletics, and swimming.
And younger girls?
Younger girls, it was athletics, gymnastics, and swimming most frequently.
Gymnastics, interesting.
Yeah. And you already start seeing those gender patterns, even that young. Rugby and football were done more often by boys, while dance and netball were more frequent for the girls.
And did that carry through as they got older into the teens?
It did, yeah. For the 15 to 18-year-old boys, the most frequent activities became running or jogging, football, and rugby.
Still heavy on the football and rugby.
Definitely. And for girls that age, it shifted toward walking, running, jogging, and netball as the most frequent.
So walking becomes a big one for older girls.
Yeah. And again, you see the gender split. Rugby football, more frequent for boys. Netball, walking, dance, more frequent for girls.
It sounds like they were involved in a lot of different things overall. Did the survey count how many different activities kids were trying?
Oh, yeah. The variety was really something. On average, young people took part in somewhere between, say, 9 and 17 different activities over the year.
9 to 17. That's a lot of different things to try.
It is. And it varied by age and gender, with boys generally doing a slightly wider range of activities than girls on average.
Was there a particular age where they were trying the most stuff, like peak exploration?
It really looked like that 11 to 14 age group was the sweet spot for variety. A really high percentage of kids in that middle school bracket had done 16 or more different activities.
16 plus. Wow, they were really sampling everything then.
Seems like it. A period of broad engagement, trying lots of options.
Okay, so loads of variety, especially around those middle years. But what about sticking with things? How many activities were they doing regularly, like week in, week out?
Right, so moving from just tried it to doing it often. On average, it was between 3 and 5 activities done regularly.
3 to 5 a week? That still sounds pretty involved.
It is. And importantly, most kids were doing something regularly. About 9 out of 10 boys and most girls did at least one activity regularly.
So a strong baseline of consistent activity for nearly everyone.
Exactly. A really solid foundation.
Did that level of doing multiple things regularly hold up as they got older?
We did see a bit of a drop-off there. For the older students, the 15 to 18-year-olds, they were less likely to be doing 2 or more activities regularly compared to the younger ones.
Ah, okay. So still active, but maybe focusing their time a bit more.
That seems likely, yeah. Probably competing interests, schoolwork, part-time jobs, all that stuff starts to factor in.
Makes sense. Now, what about big events like weekend tournaments, competitions, that sort of thing? Did many kids participate in those?
That was less common than just general participation.
Hmm.
Around 3 out of 10 boys and maybe 2.5 out of 10 girls took part in at least one event like that during the year.
So a smaller group involved in those bigger, maybe more committed events?
Exactly. And interestingly, participation in those events clearly went down as the kids got older.
Really? So the big weekend stuff was more for the younger ones?
It seems so. Maybe less appeal or less time for the older teenagers.
Were certain types of events more popular?
Yeah, it varied. For younger boys, things like fishing events were surprisingly popular in the list.
Fishing events, okay.
Yeah. For older boys and girls, running and walking events tended to be the main draw. And for girls, generally, running, walking, and swimming events were the most common types they participated in.
Right. Okay, so we know what they did and how often. Let's talk about how they participated. Was it mostly through clubs, school teams, just kicking a ball around?
Well, clubs and schools were definitely major players. Sports clubs, for instance, about 6 out of 10 boys belonged to one.
6 out of 10, that's a majority of boys.
Yeah, and almost 5 out of 10 girls.
Yeah.
So substantial numbers. They estimated it was around 230,000 boys and 177,000 girls in clubs.
Huge numbers. Was there an age peak for clubs?
Again, that 11 to 14 group had the highest club participation. It really does seem like a key time for getting involved in organized sport.
And you mentioned ethnic variations earlier. Did that apply to clubs?
It did. ANZ European students had the highest club rates, while Asian students had the lowest participation in clubs, according to the survey.
Okay. And how did school teams compare to clubs?
Also very significant, around half of all students, 5 out of 10 boys and girls were part of a school sports team.
So roughly similar numbers to clubs, maybe slightly less overall?
Roughly, yeah. And again, peak participation was in that 11-14 age group. Really highlights how important schools are for sports during those years.
Now that term mucking around, how did that fit in comparison to the organized stuff like school and clubs?
This is one of the really fascinating findings, I think, for almost every single activity they asked about.
Yeah.
Participation was highest when kids were just mucking around with friends, family, on their own, just informal play.
Higher than school or club participation for most sports?
For almost all of them, yeah. Think spontaneous games, kicking a ball in the park, backyard cricket.
Wow.
The only real exceptions where school-organized activity was higher were things like athletics, specific Mori activities, and orienteering.
That really drives home how important that unstructured, informal activity is.
Absolutely. Don't underestimate the power of just letting kids play.
Were there any sports that had strong numbers in both school and club settings, kind of bridging the gap?
Yes, definitely. Some activities seemed well supported by both systems. For boys, things like football, rugby union, rugby league, swimming, and touch rugby showed good participation in both school and clubs.
Okay.
And for girls, dance, football, especially for the 10-14s, netball, swimming, and walking were all pretty prominent in both settings too.
Good to know which ones had that dual pathway. Let's switch focus slightly to the competitive side. What level were kids playing at? Was it mostly just for fun or more serious competition?
Well, the survey looked at 10 to 18-year-olds for this, and it found the majority were actually involved in competitive sport.
Oh, really? More than just social play?
Yeah, that could be school competitions, club competitions, playing for a top team, even representing the region or, nationally for a few. A smaller group said they only played socially, just for fun.
Were boys and girls similar in how competitive they were?
There was a difference there. Boys were generally more likely than girls to be playing at those higher competitive levels like top teams or regional rep teams.
Okay, a gender difference in reaching those higher tiers.
Yeah. And again, some ethnic variations were noted in the highest level played, suggesting maybe different pathways or opportunities depending on background.
Right. Now, something else the survey covered, which is great, is volunteering. Were young people giving back to sport?
They were, quite significantly, actually. Around 4 out of 10 young people, boys and girls, reported doing some kind of volunteering in sport.
4 out of 10. That's brilliant. Any age group stand out.
The 10 to 14-year-olds were slightly more likely to be volunteering than the other age groups.
And what were they doing? What kind of roles?
The main things mentioned were being a team captain, being a general helper, like a ball kid, or scoring, managing equipment.
Yep.
And also helping out with coaching, like an assistant coach role.
Good to see that engagement. Were there patterns in who volunteered?
There were, yes. Pacific and Maori young people were actually more likely to volunteer compared to the average.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. While Asian young people were less likely to report volunteering in sport, and the types of roles they took on also showed some variation across those groups.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, the big one, time. How much time were kids actually spending on all this sport and recreation each week?
They tried to estimate this by combining a few things. Active PE time at school, time spent training or playing matches, and that mucking around time.
Right, adding it all up.
And when they combined it all, the majority of young people were spending 3 or more hours a week on sport and recreation.
3+ hours for the majority. That sounds pretty healthy.
It does. But, there was a but. That total time tended to go down as they got older.
Ah, okay. An age-related drop.
Yes, and that drop was particularly noticeable for girls in the 15 to 18 age group.
Right, we saw that pattern earlier with regular participation, too. What about just the mucking around time on its own?
Boys consistently spent more time just mucking around doing active stuff than girls did.
Okay.
And for both boys and girls, that informal mucking around time decreased as they got into their teens. Less spontaneous play as they got older, it seems.
The report mentioned something about a specific target, 3 hours of organized sport per week. How did the kids measure up against that?
Yeah, that was a strategic measure they looked at. The survey found that the younger kids, the 7 to 14-year-olds, were generally closer to hitting that 3-hour mark for organized sports specifically.
Closer than the older ones.
Yes, closer than the 15 to 18-year-olds. And within that older group, again, boys were more likely to meet that 3-hour organized sport threshold than girls were.
Okay, consistent themes emerging there. Just wrapping up, what about general interest? What sports did they want to do? And were they watching sport too?
Yeah, they asked what kids wanted to try or do more of. Top mentions overall included things like football, netball, swimming, rugby, the popular ones, basically.
Surprisingly.
But again, with some ethnic variations in those aspirations. And yes, definitely engage spectators too. Watching sport on TV, online, going to live games.
All of the above.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And viewing habits also differed a bit by ethnicity. For example, Pacific kids were more likely to watch across all formats, while Asian kids leaned a bit more towards online viewing, according to the data.
Okay, wow. That was a really thorough deep dive into that survey. If you had to boil it down, what are the absolute key takeaways from this 2011 snapshot?
I think the main thing is just how significant sport and active recreation clearly were in the lives of young New Zealanders back then. Huge participation, lots of variety, different ways of being involved.
Yeah, that 99% participation figure is hard to forget.
Yeah, exactly. It was just part of growing up, it seems.
And what were the real aha moments for you looking through this? The things that really stood out?
I think a few things. Definitely the importance of that informal mucking around.
Yeah.
Realizing That was often the most common way kids were active in many sports.
Right, not just structured lessons or teams.
Exactly. Also, that clear age-related drop-off, especially in organized sport, and particularly for teenage girls,
Mm-hmm.
that's a persistent challenge, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah.
And finally, just how consistently those ethnic variations appeared. Not just in what they played, but how they participated, volunteering, spectating. It paints a really nuanced picture.
So looking back at this 2011 data now, what questions does it raise for you thinking about today?
Oh, loads. Primarily, how has it changed? It's over a decade later. How have things like technology, social media, maybe different cultural influences affected these patterns?
Good question.
And what are the real root causes behind those gender and ethnic differences we saw? Are they access issues, cultural preferences, support systems? Understanding that seems key.
And I guess, how do we use this knowledge?
Yeah, how can we actually use insights like these to better support all young people to stay active and engaged, especially through those tricky teenage years?
Really important question. So perhaps a final thought for our listeners to take away.
I guess it's that this survey, while incredibly valuable, is a snapshot in time. The story of young people, sport, and activity is always evolving. It makes you wonder, doesn't, what does the next chapter look like?